Holy hell. Jacob Fatu just unleashed the most savage and brutal retaliation we've ever witnessed in WWE history, and Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed are lucky to still be breathing after what the Tribal Combat officer just did to them. This wasn't just revenge, this was complete and total annihilation that left both men broken, bloodied, and questioning every life choice that led them to cross the bloodline. But here's what's got me seeing absolutely red with fury: it took Jacob Fatu going completely off the rails for WWE management to finally pay attention to the reign of terror that Reed and Breakker have been conducting for months. Where was this concern when they were systematically destroying every other wrestler on the roster? Why did it take the OTC Roman Reigns getting brutalized for anyone in power to care? The footage that just dropped from Jacob's rampage is so intense and visceral that even seasoned wrestling veterans are saying they've never seen anything like it. This wasn't a wrestling match, this was a man possessed by rage delivering the kind of justice that comes from the deepest, most primal need for family vengeance. And let me tell you exactly what Jacob Fatu did to these two cowards, because what happened backstage after their attack on Roman Reigns makes their previous destruction look like a children's tea party. Jacob didn't just find Reed and Breakker, he hunted them down like the predators they are and made them pay for every single act of violence they've committed. The sound of Jacob's war cry echoing through the backstage corridors was absolutely bone-chilling and served as a warning to everyone in the building that the Tribal Combat officer had been unleashed. This wasn't the controlled, strategic Jacob we've seen before, this was pure, unbridled fury in human form. But here's what makes Jacob's retaliation even more satisfying: he used Reed and Breakker's own tactics against them, proving that when it comes to brutal, no-holds-barred warfare, the Bloodline's enforcer is in a completely different league than these pretenders. They thought they were apex predators until they met a real monster. The first target of Jacob's rampage was Bron Breakker, and what the Tribal Combat officer did to Goldberg's protege was absolutely sickening in the best possible way. Jacob caught Breakker in the equipment room and proceeded to use every piece of wrestling gear as a weapon in his systematic destruction of the would-be powerhouse. Breakker's screams of agony as Jacob methodically broke him down piece by piece were music to every wrestling fan's ears who had watched this bully terrorize innocent wrestlers for months. Finally, someone was making him pay for his crimes against the roster. The specific way Jacob used the weight room equipment to torture Breakker was both creative and absolutely brutal. Bench presses became instruments of punishment, dumbbells became projectiles, and the squat rack became Breakker's personal torture chamber. Jacob turned the gym into his own personal house of horrors. But the psychological warfare Jacob employed was even more devastating than the physical punishment. He made Breakker watch as he systematically destroyed everything the young wrestler had worked for: his confidence, his reputation, his aura of invincibility. All of it crumbled under the Tribal Combat officer's relentless assault. And then Jacob moved on to Bronson Reed, and what happened next was so savage that I can barely bring myself to describe it. That Tsunami found himself caught in a real tidal wave of violence as Jacob demonstrated why he's considered the most dangerous man in all of professional wrestling. Reed's attempts to fight back were absolutely pathetic compared to Jacob's methodical demolition. Every punch Reed threw was answered with three from Jacob. Every move Reed attempted was countered with devastating efficiency. It was like watching a masterclass in combat superiority. The way Jacob used Reed's own size and momentum against him was absolutely brilliant and showed the tactical genius that makes him such an effective enforcer for the Bloodline. Reed thought his weight advantage would help him, but Jacob turned it into a liability that made every impact twice as devastating. But here's what made Jacob's destruction of Reed even more satisfying: the poetic justice of using Reed's own finishing move against him. When Jacob delivered that tsunami splash onto Reed's already broken ribs, you could hear the crack echo through the entire backstage area. The student had become the master. The medical team that eventually arrived to treat Reed and Breakker reportedly found them in conditions so severe that both men had to be rushed to the hospital immediately. Multiple broken bones, internal injuries, severe lacerations. Jacob had literally dismantled both wrestlers like they were toys. And throughout this entire rampage, Jacob was sending a clear message not just to Reed and Breakker, but to every wrestler in the locker room who might be thinking about crossing the bloodline. This is what happens when you mess with family. This is the price of disrespecting the tribal chief. The psychological impact of Jacob's retaliation on the rest of the WWE roster cannot be overstated. Every wrestler in the building now knows that attacking Roman Reigns doesn't just mean dealing with the tribal chief himself, it means facing the wrath of the most dangerous enforcer in the business. But what's making me absolutely furious about the aftermath of Jacob's rampage is how WWE management is suddenly concerned about excessive violence and going too far. Where was this moral compass when Reed and Breakker were hospitalizing wrestlers every week? The hypocrisy is absolutely staggering. The double standard being applied here is so obvious it's insulting to our intelligence as fans. When Reed and Breakker were the ones dishing out brutal punishment, it was just intense competition and establishing dominance. But when Jacob Fatu delivers justice, suddenly it's concerning and needs investigation. Social media is absolutely exploding with support for Jacob's actions, with wrestling fans from around the world praising the Tribal Combat Officer for finally giving Reed and Breakker the beating they deserved. The hashtags #JusticeServed and #TribalJustice are trending worldwide. But here's what's really got my blood boiling: the way some wrestling experts and commentators are trying to paint Jacob as the villain in this situation. They're completely ignoring months of Reed and Breakker's reign of terror and acting like Jacob's retaliation came out of nowhere. The footage of Jacob systematically hunting down both wrestlers like a predator stalking prey is absolutely mesmerizing to watch. His tactical approach, his psychological manipulation, his physical dominance, every aspect of his performance was a masterclass in how to deliver devastating payback. What made Jacob's rampage even more impressive was how he adapted his strategy for each opponent. Against Breakker, he used power and intimidation. Against Reed, he employed speed and precision. He proved that he's not just a one-dimensional enforcer, he's a complete combat specialist. The way Jacob methodically targeted the same body parts that Reed and Breakker had injured on other wrestlers was particularly satisfying. He made them feel every bit of pain they had inflicted on innocent victims over the past months. It was karma delivered with surgical precision. And let's talk about the incredible athleticism Jacob displayed during his rampage. Despite his size and power, he moved through that backstage area like a ghost, appearing and disappearing at will, always staying one step ahead of security and always finding new ways to punish his targets. The international wrestling community's reaction to Jacob's retaliation has been overwhelmingly positive, with wrestlers from Japan, Mexico, and Europe all expressing their admiration for how the Tribal Combat Officer handled the situation. Finally, someone had stood up to the bullies. But what's most impressive about Jacob's performance is how he managed to deliver such devastating punishment while still operating within the unwritten codes of wrestling justice. He didn't use weapons unnecessarily, he didn't attack innocent bystanders, and he made sure his targets knew exactly why they were being punished. The precision with which Jacob executed his plan reveals a level of tactical thinking that most wrestlers simply don't possess. This wasn't random violence, this was calculated, strategic punishment delivered with military efficiency. Jacob is operating on a completely different intellectual level than Reed and Breakker. The psychological warfare aspects of Jacob's rampage were equally impressive. The way he used mind games, intimidation tactics, and fear to break down his opponents mentally before destroying them physically showed a sophisticated understanding of combat psychology. Reed and Breakker's complete inability to mount any meaningful resistance against Jacob's assault exposed them as the paper tigers they really are. When faced with a truly elite competitor, all their bluster and bravado evaporated instantly. They were revealed as frauds and pretenders. The medical reports coming out about Reed and Breakker's conditions are absolutely brutal but entirely justified. Multiple fractures, severe internal injuries, psychological trauma. Jacob made sure they would remember this lesson for the rest of their careers. And here's what's got me most excited about this entire situation: Jacob's rampage has completely shifted the power dynamic in WWE. Reed and Breakker's reign of terror is over, and every wrestler in the company now knows that the bloodline has their backs against bullies and cowards. The message Jacob sent to the entire locker room is crystal clear: if you stand with the bloodline, you have protection. If you stand against us, you face the consequences. It's a simple equation that even the dumbest wrestlers can understand. But what makes Jacob's retaliation even more satisfying is how it validates everything we've been saying about the bloodline's superiority for months. When push comes to shove, when it really matters, there's no group in WWE that can match their combination of skill, power, and tactical intelligence. The way Jacob coordinated his rampage while Roman was still recovering from Reed and Breakker's attack shows the incredible loyalty and dedication that exists within the bloodline family structure. Jacob didn't wait for orders or permission, he saw family in danger and took immediate action. The tactical brilliance Jacob displayed in isolating and neutralizing both targets separately prevented them from using their numbers advantage against him. By splitting them up and taking them down individually, he negated their only real strength, their willingness to gang up on opponents. And let's not forget about the incredible physical conditioning that Jacob demonstrated during his extended rampage. Most wrestlers would have been exhausted after destroying one opponent, but Jacob had enough left in the tank to completely annihilate a second target. His stamina is absolutely inhuman. The psychological profile of Jacob's approach reveals someone who has studied combat tactics at the highest levels. His use of environmental advantages, psychological pressure, and strategic positioning shows military-level training and preparation. But perhaps most impressively, Jacob managed to deliver this devastating retaliation without crossing any legal lines that would result in criminal charges. He stayed within the bounds of wrestling justice while still making Reed and Breakker pay dearly for their crimes. The international media attention Jacob's rampage is receiving is overwhelmingly positive, with sports outlets around the world praising his tactical brilliance and physical dominance. Finally, WWE has a story that showcases genuine athleticism and strategic thinking. The precedent Jacob's rampage sets for how the bloodline deals with threats is absolutely terrifying for anyone who might be thinking about challenging their authority. This wasn't just punishment, it was a demonstration of the kind of consequences that await anyone who crosses the family. The way Jacob used Reed and Breaker's own momentum and aggression against them was absolutely brilliant and showed a level of tactical awareness that most wrestlers never develop. He turned their strengths into weaknesses and their confidence into vulnerability. And here's what's got the entire wrestling world talking: the possibility that Jacob's rampage was just the opening move in a larger bloodline campaign to reassert their dominance over WWE. If this is how they handle individual threats, what will they do to larger challenges? The medical bills alone from Reed and Breaker's injuries are going to be astronomical, and they have nobody to blame but themselves. They started a war with the wrong family and paid the ultimate price for their arrogance and stupidity. But what's most satisfying about this entire situation is how it proves that actions have consequences in the wrestling world. Reed and Breaker thought they could terrorize the roster without facing any real opposition, but Jacob Fatu just showed them how wrong they were. The psychological trauma that Reed and Breaker are going to carry from this experience will likely affect their performance for the rest of their careers. Being systematically destroyed by a superior opponent isn't something wrestlers easily recover from mentally. The precedent this sets for how WWE talent should handle bullies and cowards is absolutely perfect. Instead of relying on management to solve problems, Jacob took matters into his own hands and delivered justice with his own two hands. And let's talk about the incredible courage Jacob showed by taking on two dangerous opponents simultaneously. Most wrestlers would have waited for backup or tried to get management involved, but Jacob went hunting alone because he knew he was more than capable of handling both threats. The tactical debrief of Jacob's rampage reads like something out of a military manual. His use of terrain advantages, psychological warfare, and strategic timing created a perfect storm of devastation that completely overwhelmed his opponents. The international wrestling community is already calling Jacob's performance one of the greatest single displays of dominance in wrestling history. The combination of athleticism, strategy, and raw intensity has never been matched by any performer in any promotion. But perhaps most importantly, Jacob's rampage has restored balance to WWE's ecosystem. The bullies have been put in their place, the victims have been avenged, and everyone now knows that there are consequences for crossing the line. What are your thoughts on Jacob Fatu's absolutely devastating retaliation against Reed and Breaker? Do you think they got exactly what they deserved, or did Jacob go too far? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more coverage of the Bloodline's continued dominance.